I legitimately think we are one or two events away from living in the Stone Age again. And I think it could happen in our lifetime, and it could happen to you and I. Like, I'm really convinced that the fabric of society is way more fragile than anyone appreciates.
Yeah. We've got a trifecta of items ready to be unleashed at this time: the Beaufort Gyre, the AMOC collapse, and a Heinrich event. For those who don't know, a record amount of cold, fresh water is in the Beaufort Gyre, and when it releases, it's going to be a big deal. Yale University called this the cold climate bomb just a few years ago as the record fresh water was accumulating, and as we learned just last year, it has stabilized its maximum accumulation, and it is ready to release. This is going to amplify the collapse of the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, which scientists believe could begin its demise in as little as 2 years from now. Now, while you can read any scientific paper on the AMOC collapse and find out how it's going to drive major cold, the Weather Channel said it best just a couple weeks ago. It's going to be similar to the scenario from the Ice Age movie, The Day After Tomorrow. But it actually gets worse, because the historical cold maker is happening right now as well. We are entering a Heinrich event. These occur when too much polar heat melts ice, and that contributes to the cooler, fresher ocean, but on a massive scale. One of the best modern studies complementing the mountain of historical studies is this one: more cold, more storms. That's what happens when you melt the polar region. There is already extra cloud cover albedo building due to the heating that has taken place, due to the extra evaporation. And when the tipping point in the oceans occurs from there being colder and fresher, creating colder winds and more easily producible sea ice in winter, things are going to swing the other way very quickly here on Earth. There is not evidence of all of these things happening at the same time in thousands of years, but the freshwater release, the melting ice, and the collapse of the circulation means that every ounce of warming we see is a lead foot on the gas pedal towards the next glacial and ice age condition. Not only is this evident in all of the observable data here on Earth, but we are due for it in the natural cycle. Heinrich events have been happening every 6,000 years. It's been 6,000 years since the last one, and the Earth is already starting to do it again.
For decades, those with eyes to see have been aware of chemtrails in our skies. And for decades, we were called conspiracy theorists. But in 2016, while serving as director of the CIA, John Brennan admitted that chemtrails are real at the Council on Foreign Relations.
Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do. An SAI program could limit global temperature increases, reducing some risks associated with higher temperatures and providing the world economy additional time to transition from fossil fuels. This process is also relatively inexpensive. The National Research Council estimates that a fully deployed SAI program would cost about $10 billion yearly.
In 2007, it was announced that nano-sized particles, known as smart dust, can be dispersed over the battlefield via aerial spraying. The military has contracted several multinational corporations to develop wearable biosensors. Biosensors and smart dust can become something known as body dust that can spread inside the human body as an active network, capable to provide telemetry from inside the body for the use of monitoring humans. There is a patent for using polyethylene glycol derivatives as a way to modify the weather. These polymers can be integrated with biosensors and soft robotics for smart materials that can be modified by external stimuli. Soft robotics is a subfield of robotics that utilizes compliant materials rather than rigid ones. DuPont is manufacturing elastomers for fast-moving soft robots and have developed the fastest DEA-driven soft robots ever reported, designed for biosensing, interacting with biological entities, and actuating on a cellular level. In her recent article, Smart Dust, Biosensors, Polymers for Geoengineering, and the Multinational Corporations that Manufacture Them, Dr. Anna Maria Mielchia points out that these are the technologies that will be giving AI enormous amounts of data, as Bill Gates said, to understand 100 trillion organisms. She also points out the important fact that the elastomers being fabricated by DuPont for this soft robot technology are made of the exact same chemicals found when analyzing the messagens, a compound that displays liquid crystal properties, found in targeted individuals, which appear to be the same structures used as part of electronic circuitry in self-assembly nanotechnology. Smart Dust is a system of tiny microelectromechanical systems that can detect light, temperature, vibration, magnetism, or chemicals. They are operated wirelessly on a computer network, can be used for medical or military surveillance purposes, and can be dispersed through the air via chemtrails, which would greatly go unnoticed by the sleeping masses who have come to accept them. When combined with the Messagen soft robot technology, they could create a means of monitoring and controlling the entire human population.
Perhaps the greatest lie ever perpetrated on populations all over the world is the condensation trail lie. What we're seeing in our skies is not condensation. It's sprayed particulate dispersions with very few exceptions.
They shouldn't be there. Jet engines burn clean. So if there's anything coming out of them, it's an additive.
They're absolutely not contrails. Contrails do not linger, dissipate, and go into cloud coverage, period, in the report.
And I kept saying to people, what is this? Because now the sky is no longer blue, it's starting to turn gray. And what I found was kind of like it was not socially acceptable. We're all going to pretend this is not really happening. And I thought, oh, this is very bad.
Most are unfamiliar with the science term called global dimming. That term refers to the amount of direct sunlight that no longer reaches the surface of the planet due to light scattering particles that are building up in the atmosphere. And although many of these particles are from industrialized pollution, the larger majority are from the ongoing climate engineering solar radiation management operations. This engine, a high bypass turbofan jet engine, this is the engine that is on all military tankers and all commercial carriers, is in essence a jet-powered fan. 90% of the air that moves through this engine is non-combusted. This engine by design is nearly incapable of producing any condensation trail except under rare and extreme circumstances. And again, we have film footage of aircraft flying at altitude with nozzles visible, turning on and off. That is the end of the argument. Since even before man could fly, there was an effort to try to modify the weather. We have weather modification patents going back 100 years plus.
These are historical films of what can be done with a biplane, a small biplane that carries a very small payload. And that much can be done. How much more can a fully loaded military tanker, KC-10, KC-135, C-17 Globemaster, how much more material can they put in the air? About 500 times more with a single tanker.
In regard to the condensation trail narrative, many refer back to the trails left by World War II bombers as proof that we are only seeing condensation trails in our skies. But geoengineeringwatch.org found on military archives film footage, which we posted, of World War II B-17s at altitude turning off a sprayed dispersion. We know that climate engineering was deployed immediately after World War II, so testing was absolutely ongoing. Clearly, these bombers were used for beta testing. Film footage proves it.
Weather was a weapon used over Vietnam. Would you expect that to be then deleted from the availability? No. To continue to expand the scientific aspects of it, to have it available in your portfolio of weapons would be a natural process. Therefore, should you expect that it is available on demand to have the ability to modify weather? Absolutely, within this country and others.
Climate engineering is the crown jewel of the military-industrial complex. Climate engineering has been used to destabilize and topple nations all over the globe, facilitating military occupations by hostile countries like the U.S. We know that some of these countries are having their precipitation cut off because they have stated so on the floor of the UN, like the president of Iran stating emphatically that NATO weather modification programs were cutting off the precipitation to Iran, but U.S. media never covered it.
We have an economic model operating globally, which is operating based on covert force. And I have very serious questions after watching the financial patterns as to whether that financial force or that force includes weather warfare.
People were coming to me, telling me about this. So because of that, I went to the government in Ottawa under Freedom of Information. It was a 40-page report, of which half the pages were completely blank, and the other half had a lot of blank outs. But there was sufficient information to tell me that, yeah, they're aware. They call it geoengineering.
One of the big problems is that when we find some new technology, we get all excited by it, by the potential benefits of that technology, and often implement it and use the technology before we have any idea of the negative effects.
Shouldn't it be considered that every breath we take is laden with highly toxic particles that are wreaking havoc in our own bodies? Particles that aren't being reported by any air quality testing systems. Any official air quality testing are looking for PM10 or PM2.5, 2.5 microns at best. The climate engineering nanoparticulates are exponentially smaller. They go virtually unreported.
These nanomaterials generate reactive oxygen species in biological materials, damage tissue, lead to advanced aging, cause cancer, causative agents of dementia. So, yeah, we might think that we're doing something positive for humanity to save our species, but we're also poisoning ourselves.
Eventually, with the team that we formed at geoengineeringwatch.org, we were able to acquire a NOAA flying lab. We were able to test at altitude to confirm the elements that were showing up at the surface.
Our intention was to do a point-to-point sampling mission. We could see these obvious patterns that were being laid out in the sky. We were really thankful for the opportunity to be able to get up to altitude. And on the return mission, we noticed that that cloud layer had descended. And we sampled below the cloud layer, we sampled through that confluent layer and above it.
We found exactly the same elements listed in climate engineering patents. The same elements we found on countless surface tests of precipitation from all over the globe.
You want some figures? Okay, latest water test. Tested the rain. 13,100 micrograms per liter of aluminum in the rain in 2013. Normally, it should be 0. So 13,100 is pretty damn much, folks. It used to be 0. Then it was 100s in the 2000s. And then since 2010, it's into the 1000s and the latest 13,100. In the snow on Mount Shasta, pristine Mount Shasta, 61,000 feet. No, excuse me, 8,000 foot level, 61,000 micrograms per liter. 4 times the amount that is found in the soil up there. Where in the hell is this stuff coming from if it's not coming from the soil? You know, these tests are international in scope. We're seeing this all over the world, guys. Okay, pH of acid soils is 20 times more alkaline. The aluminum in the soil has doubled in the last 10 years. Aluminum blocks essential nutrients. I am unable in my garden to restore normal pH, and that's because nanoparticles are now in the circulatory systems of both plants and humans. So welcome, fellow guinea pigs. The collapse and decrease of agriculture is something I worry about even more than the previous info about autism and Alzheimer's.
System, and the safe, never perturbed us. ask what determines the Earth's climate, clearly the main thing that determines it is sunlight. Sunlight is what heats the Earth. Not all the light that arrives at the Earth from the sun goes to heating the Earth. Some of it is reflected back. It's just the part that is absorbed. And what happens is there's a certain rate at which sunlight is absorbed by the Earth's surface, and there's a certain rate at which the Earth's surface radiates to space. What comes from the sun is in the ordinary visible part of the spectrum that our eyes are sensitive to. What the Earth radiates into space is in the infrared part of the spectrum, longer waves than red, that our eyes are not sensitive to, but it's as legitimate, a form of light as the kind that we're used to. Now, if you calculate what the temperature of the Earth ought to be from how much sunlight is being absorbed, equaling how much infrared radiation would be radiated to space, you find that the Earth's temperature, by this simple calculation, is too low. It's about 30 centigrade degrees too low. The significant temperature changes on the Earth between ice ages and out of ice ages, glacial and interglacial time periods, seems to be connected with quite small changes in the amount of sunlight that reaches the Earth. I'd like to stress that the greenhouse effect makes life on Earth possible. If there were not a greenhouse effect, the temperature would, as I say, be 30 centigrade degrees or so colder, and that's well below the freezing point of water everywhere on the planet. The oceans would be solid after a while. Greenhouse effect is a good thing.
The suppression of uncomfortable ideas may be common in religion or in politics, but it is not the path to knowledge, and there's no place for it in the endeavor of science.
It knows exactly what is happening to this planet, a magnetic pole shift. First up, the confirmation that as of the 2010 magnetic field updates, Earth's field has weakened 15%, meaning that by now, in 2024, we're likely down 25 to 30%. This is confirmed by their acknowledgement of what geophysicists and the European Swarm mission said, that the magnetic pole shift and weakening of the field is progressing 10 times faster than previously believed, and that the field is in fact undergoing a significant shift. I remember when the Swarm mission director said exactly this over a decade ago, that we are seeing the stages unfold of the next magnetic pole reversal of this planet, with the primary concern being the increased interaction between the solar wind and Earth's atmosphere and biosphere, our living world. There is acknowledgement that this is an unmitigated disaster at a global scale, worse than earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes, hurricanes, pretty much every other natural phenomenon, with the lone exception being a planet-killing asteroid impact. During these magnetic events, the field drops by 90%. Down to only 10% of its normal strength. We've seen that several other places as well in the scientific research. This presents many risks to our planet, and they begin here with the normal technological risk from space weather events, moving on to how it can impact the atmosphere, infrastructure, and cause the death of many humans. One of the most important debates in this field, that these events can happen very quickly. Many scientists today are still trying to tell people that these events all take thousands of years, but that is not what the newest and most robust data is saying. We have evidence for several of these events that took place in less than 100 years. We're already more than 100 years into this one, which means that in theory, it could happen at any time. The field complexity and reversal process would get very messy, with not just an overall increase in space radiation exposure, but with areas having amplified exposure as the multipolar component of the field becomes prominent compared to the dipole component. I really like this next part, discussion of the severity of the 1859 and 1989 solar storms, how one took out power in only 90 seconds after the storm began, and how back then, Earth's magnetic protection was stronger than it is now, much more so in the 1859 event. The impact today would be disastrous. This graphic shows what the storm power of the 1859 event would have taken out in terms of the U.S. power grids, and again, with the magnetic field weakening now, the next one is going to be a lot worse than this, likely a total loss scenario, with impacts expanding to the GPS and radio signal communication networks. In their best imaginable case, a minimum of 130 million Americans would be without critical infrastructure for years to decades. This is just the latest in many publications saying that this would result in millions of American deaths worldwide. That number would be in the billions. And of course, that's the best case scenario. Then the focus comes to other infrastructure, starting with the food, production facilities, transportation, grocery stores, refrigeration, credit card processing, all fail in this scenario. And of course, there would be severe failures of the technology at the agricultural base level as well, at farms across the world. We're talking going back to handwork through and through. Billions would starve. No food, no water purification or distribution, no gasoline. But it gets even better. The cosmic radiation exposure would be massive, with solar particle destruction of ozone reaching severely dangerous levels. This would cause DNA mutations and severe UV exposure. Imagine several years of 40% or more ozone depletion, with short-term solar storms taking us to near zero for days to weeks at a time. It is well known that for every 1% reduction in ozone, we will get enough UV to increase 1 to 3% in terms of melanoma and skin cancer. So a sustained 40% decrease with intermittent total loss scenarios is an absolute catastrophe for life on Earth, from humans down to microorganisms. There is even a brief acknowledgement of the increase likely in heart attacks and things like dementia, not the dozens of other known health impacts from pregnancy to psychological stresses to cellular processes. All of those ones we have covered at the channel would be amplified as well. They do, however, hit the plant issues. Many important crops show vulnerability to increased ultraviolet rays, including stunted growth, lower yields, and damage to their cellular structures. Up next, they toss in the current magnetic protection of Earth in an excellent graphic, which not only shows the major weak spot in the South Atlantic, which is the point on Earth where the magnetic poles are currently moving away from, but they are set to meet in the Northeast Indian Ocean, which is why you see the two strongest points in red converging there on the other side of the world. The nation, and indeed the world, are not prepared. I speak with people in Congress, the military, and several key organizations, and I can tell you, nothing has changed since this paper came out. The climate stuff has all their attention, well, that and neo-pronouns, but the situation of the magnetic pole shift is largely being ignored, even while recent efforts have been made to amplify monitoring of space weather itself. But it's not enough. I fully understand their decision to not extend this work to the extinctions caused by these magnetic events. It would double or triple the length of the paper, even though one could easily imply such things from the evidence given. But don't forget, this is where we focus here at the channel, the evidence of extinctions with magnetic pole shifts. We've shown the key papers, interviewed the world's best expert on the topic. By the way, he told us we're in big trouble if you didn't see that one. If you are new to this information, I am literally begging you, look right below the video and find the Earth disaster video. This is huge. It's bigger than just the Earth, and you need to be aware of this situation as much as the cultural, political, and economic issues that we are facing now as well.
Governments all over the globe and the entire climate science community are telling the population urgently that climate engineering operations, solar radiation management operations need to be immediately deployed to try to mitigate the warming of our planet, to try to preserve what's left of its life support systems. And yet when the public, those that are awake, try to bring to the attention of academia and elected officials that we see climate engineering already being conducted in our skies all over the globe. It's already been deployed. Lab tests prove it. Film footage proves it. Documents prove it. And yet we have the continued denial from the climate science community and official agencies telling us that we're not really seeing what we're seeing in the skies. They tell us if climate engineering were deployed, it would look exactly like what we're seeing in our skies, but then again, they tell us that we're not really seeing what we are actually seeing.
We've become a slave to a paradigm that's an illusion. All of what you see is not real, though it has real effects upon your life. You are simply maneuvered by a control system that you need to break free of. I'm trying to help you before it comes crumbling down, and then your heart starts pumping very fast. Because in your mind, you will think that your world came to an end. Men's hearts will fail them for fear, for looking after those things that are coming upon the world. That's not from one thing, that's from multiple things.
Book of Enoch, chapter 65. And Noah saw the earth turned over and knew its destruction was near. Yes. That's about as clear as it gets.
This is where we hold them. This is where we fight. And these shields, boys!
The moral to be drawn from this dangerous nightmare situation is a simple one. Don't let it happen. It depends on you.